at it, you're just seeing these little bursts of color, and even random at times. So it's moments like those that were the most fun to paint, and moments which I think make the series fun in itself. And I also found myself really inspired by the work of Janet Fish, who is a realist still life painter. And above that, she just has a really gorgeous color vocabulary. So her still lifes were a huge influence on my own still lifes in this project. And I would say that my color choices are more so influenced by Richard Little, who is a realist and an abstractionist, and he's even known as a biomorphic abstractionist. And I would experiment before in previous work with different colored underpaintings, but Little's work is what inspired me to go on with the full-on candy-coated pink underpainting. He just uses really gorgeous violets and hot pinks and blues in his work that I wanted to emulate in my own. So now we can move on to the teeny tiny one. So this one was actually the last painting that I did. And I thought that along with these sort of vibrant, dreamlike themes that I have going on, a huge jump in scale would be especially fun and appropriate for this series. So the smaller painting and the one next to it are actually a pair in itself. So this one is from the perspective of me taking a photo of my mom at the dinner table, and this larger one is from the perspective of my mom taking a photo of me. So they sort of go hand in hand. And I initially didn't want any human subjects or forms in my work, but I thought the human form in a sort of indirect or passive way, for lack of better words, was interesting. And, you know, my project is about this lack of closeness, but it's also about sort of the human yearning and hopefulness for it, and this interruption of intimacy that not only is happening during the pandemic, but in the 21st century as a whole. And so for that, I decided to crop the figure out of the photo, you know, not including any identifiable features of the face or even anything from the chest up, to sort of push that concept of disconnect. And, you know, these figures here they're sitting in an intimate setting and they're experiencing an intimate moment. And yet there's nothing here that tells us who they are or what they're feeling. So that sort of cutting them out breaks the intimacy, and it feels more distant and feels disconnected. And, you know, we're living in such a technology dominant world, and we have been for quite some time. And, you know, there are things like social media platforms that are creating false images of ourselves. So I decided to also embrace the warping that I found in my reference photos. You know, I painted these paintings from the photos on my phone. So embracing that warping and even exaggerating the pulling down of the image was something that I found necessary to include in my work. Okay, so now to move on to the bigger one. I love painting at a larger scale. I think this 30 by 48 is probably the largest that I've ever done, but as a gestural painter, I think it can be difficult to let loose when you're confined to such a small space or a small scale. So I definitely enjoyed this one the most. I really never thought that I would be doing still life paintings for my graduation project. You know, I started out as a figure painter, and I guess you could say that figure painting was my first love, but I wanted to branch out and challenge myself this semester, and definitely for the BFA, and sort of make something that's not so interesting a little more interesting, and maybe even a little weird. So, you know, I had never used quinacridone magenta for figures or the underpaintings of my figures, so that was a really different and interesting but exciting concept that I experimented with in this project. I love acrylic paint because you're able to just layer so many different colors on top of each other, and you're able to see those colors show through from underneath. I can't even tell you how many layers of color I've put in the skin alone of this figure, but it's definitely like over 20. But yeah, this was just absolutely fun to complete. And my favorite part of this entire series was painting this little enigma over here. It was supposed to be a croissant, but it ended up looking like a shrimp or a lobster. It's kind of a mystery, but I decided to just kind of embrace what it became. And I think that's the fun of painting in general, and the fun of gesture and experimenting with color and experimenting with shape and form. But I'd like to end this by just saying that although the themes of my work sort of stem from serious subjects, I wanted to keep the technique and the colors fun and vibrant and exciting. And I think that's why I like to describe this series as sickeningly sweet. It's because, you look at them and, they look cool, they look fun, but at its core, the meaning of it is a lot more than what you see on the surface. So with that said, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that anyone might have.
I see in your paintings there's a lot of shared color schemes. Like the first one, it's a lot of cool colors, and then you transition to warm colors. And, oh, excuse me, sorry. So I was asking Gia about the color choices of her paintings and how there are some shared color schemes in certain paintings. Like, for example, this one has some cool and warm tones versus the drinks themselves have pretty much predominantly cool tones. So I was wondering if you'd want to talk about the importance of that and how it connects each painting to the next one.
Yeah. So like I said, I didn't start out with this first one. I started out with this, which kind of has a little more of a, a little more of a color vocabulary. And so choosing to do like a blue and green underpainting for this one was, I had experimented with it before, and I thought it would be cool to not have every single one start with the same colored underpainting. And I was really influenced by Richard Little, who said that, or he didn't say this, but I noticed in his paintings, he has just these really interesting rhythms of color that are going on. So where one color is here, it might bounce to the other side of the canvas and just, create more of an interesting color story. So like I said, it's not so much random as it is instinctual, but maybe if I started out like with the orange here on the cake, I would be like, okay, I'm gonna put a little bit of orange here on the spoon and in this lobster croissant that I have over here. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Let's just walk to Juliette's wall and then she can take over the screen so we can get a view.
Hi, so I'm actually online, so I'll be presenting from my screen. If that is okay with everyone. Sorry, it takes a second. So, hi, hello. I'm Juliette Puplava. I'm a BFA candidate for digital imaging here at University of Hawaii at Manoa. And my project for the 2022 BFA showcase is called Sanitized Youth. It speaks about how right now's generation of young children's memories, habits, and like core traits have all been shaped during this time. I wanted to start this conversation on what does this mean for the future and their mental health, physical aging, and how they perceive the world, because I felt a lack of discussion here. I had heard and read up on high schoolers and college students' experience. Also, I've experienced it clearly. But I couldn't help but think of my own family and the experiences that they had. I have 4 nieces and nephews that they're all under the age of 13, and I hadn't heard about this age group and the discussions happening and what that means for them as a core human. Because during this age, you're creating the foundations of what you believe, perceive, and see, and all these different things. I also was thinking about my time as an educator back when I was a TA for the elementary school in my hometown, and I was just thinking how different this must have been. So this project kind of encaptures the demographic mentioned through expressive portraits and objects of importance to help create like a better experience of this generation. The objects are a like biographical, emotional collage, I feel like, of what people go through. And these are slightly up closer images of it. And during the project and really the pandemic, I've spent a lot of time reviewing and studying what I've read during my BFA. And I've encountered throughout my undergraduate degree and minor a lot of things about psychology, and I've always had an interest in it. So this led me to revisit The Ways of Seeing by John Berger. And that's where I encountered the quote that the relation of what we see and what we know is never settled. We know the earth is turning away from the sun, yet the knowledge, the explanation never quite fits the sight. This quote kind of stuck with me along with my readings on psychology and human development that I was just researching because I'm kind of that person. My work stems from the relationships of physiology and psychology a lot of the time. I started questioning the effects of the pandemic on the youngest group of people who remember this global trauma. I spent a detailed amount of time alongside my sister, who's a PhD in psychology on human development and children's development specifically. And I asked her what this age range can really comprehend of a situation and what they can retain and how those long-term effects happen. And she was pretty insightful on it for my research, but I delved deeper into readings. However, the textbooks are reliable. My sister is reliable, but the brain is a complex system that exists. And sometimes visual expression is more valuable than words. So that's kind of what led me down this path of creating this work. I primarily worked with photography and an alternative low-tech printing for this project that I learned abroad in my recent semester abroad in South Korea. The main medium of this work, however, is the hand sanitizer I used for it. I used it to print transfer portraits and the collages of the youth coming of age during the pandemic. On high-end traditional printmaking paper, I chose hand sanitizer because it's something we all know and have an understanding of due to the pandemic. So it brings this item of comfort, I say it with very loose meaning in that, paired with the hard discussion of mental health of youth, which is something that's very hard sometimes to open up about and consider the effects of. And I thought the sanitizer worked as a great agent for this imperfect transference, and it also mirrors the idea that there's an imperfect understanding of what's going on. So I used that to kind of create this work together, and then I basically pieced them. I pieced them all together through that idea, and then I will start back from here on each person because I interviewed all the kids and I talked to their families and everything too during this process. So this is Lennox. He is 5. He has completely been homeschooled for preschool, his first year of preschool during the pandemic. He had to also relocate with his family to Hawaii, so he didn't have any friend connections to begin with, so he's kind of only known this. So a lot of his toys and interests seem to be really what he experienced through the television, which was an interesting thing. He wasn't very comfortable with photography of himself, and I thought that was a fun little thing. Then there was Opal. She's 2, so she was born during the pandemic, and she hasn't known anything but the pandemic. When I first met her, the first thing she asked me about was hand sanitizer, and I thought that was really interesting. And for her, it was a little bit of a different process of collecting items. For her specific items, I actually went back and established a relationship with her so that because I don't know if you know toddlers, they don't like to share. So this was my way of asking her parents if I could get things. So hers included a lot of toys, little whistles, anything that kind of engages the processing systems that you're starting to develop around this age. She also wasn't really familiar with cameras and was not about it, but it could also just be being a toddler. And then next to that is Ilan. He is a traditional classical nerd, and he has Harry Potter, cars, he's into all these different toys. And when I talked to him about it, he was like, I don't quite understand the beginning, but now I kind of just accepted how things have gone along. And then there is Milo, who is in 3rd grade, and he is 9. And he is a very interesting person to talk to because he's very well-spoken for his age, and that might be because of the idea of, like, he was slightly parentified and aged and became mature. But he also had to relocate to a whole different school, had 2 years online, had 1 year in person now of elementary school, and he said, like, he lost his childhood, like the beginning of his childhood friends. So he became really indulged in books, writing, and then, like, he slowly integrated things that are important to the people at his new school. Then there's Justice, who is a 8th grader that is graduating, and he has experienced all of middle school online, which I cannot process the idea of going through that online. But he is a sports person, so one of the cool things that is in his portrait is a jersey from when he was in 5th grade, when he was number 7 for soccer. But now he plays basketball with his friends. He's able to create this community and this sense of belonging that most teenagers, preteens are starting to get into at this time. Kayla was another interesting one. She was a 7th grader, so she had partial elementary school, partial middle school. And hers has her, like, skating stuff because she's actually super outdoorsy. But she also, as I was talking to her, slowly, like, snuck me this makeup bag that had all these things because she's really interested in that. When I asked her how she felt about the pandemic, she summarized it as, I learned a lot of tricks, and now I don't know how to, like, talk to my friends anymore, because it's during this age group that you're learning to talk and understand and create these deeper relationships, not just, like, the subliminal understanding. And then the next person is Asher. He's going into 1st grade, so he was really full of character. He was an active member of, like, Boy Scouts right before the pandemic started. Like, he started having that, and then the Boy Scouts stopped, but, like, their parents saw the reaction to being in nature and how important it was to him. So over the last year, because homeschool for these kids made school even shorter, so they're experiencing maybe 3 hours of learning a day, 4 hours of learning a day at max. So he would go outside and interact with all this stuff with his parents as a way to reconnect. His parents are also teachers, so that was an interesting aspect to talk to as well. And then the last person who I think really summarizes my work is Naija. She is also a graduating 8th grader. She experienced all of it online as the others. But when you look at all these works, you see these people who have all these, like, somewhat put together pieces, but hers, when she handed me the objects to photograph and scan to put into an image that I was going to print, she was like, I have specific designations, I have specific ways I want to do these things. And if you think about the pandemic, it is all about the specifics of experience, what you do, how you react to it, and how we've all gone through it. And when I asked her what she feels like now, she's like, I finally feel like I can maybe have a normal experience. And she's like, I'm extremely scared for high school. So it was one of my favorite things to look at this work and participate in the process of this. So I will open up the floor to any questions, any interest of any of the things. So if you put in the chat, let me know.
If you're in the audience, you can raise your hand. But people here can ask questions through my computer if you want.
What was your process in creating these works? I noticed they have an interesting texture on them. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so my works, as I stated, I used hand sanitizer as a transfer. I learned it when I was abroad in South Korea this last semester as a way I was discussing with someone who also focuses a lot on the memory and concepts that we go through. And she was like, you should experiment with it. And when I was in Korea, it was a little bit different in how it looked. If you look at, hold on, can I control this? There we go. Oh, there we go. This one, you could see like it's a little bit more different in texture. So for the whole entire process, it involved photographing, interviewing, taking the image, printing it on a transparent piece of paper. So like old transparencies that we used to have in high school, like the teachers used to write on. And then I would take a roller, print it on a hand sanitizer coated paper, and it would be coated about 4 times. And then I would lift it off and see what came and what stuck in the colors.
Was the one of the reasons you chose to work with children focus that for your project?
Sorry, can you repeat that? There was a bit of an echo for a second.
Repeat it a second.
Why did you choose to focus on children for the focus of your project? And is it something personal that you like that work on?
So I kind of briefly touched on it. So a lot of things indirectly factored into me wanting to focus on children. So my first job in high school was working as a teacher's assistant for an elementary school on Fridays because my school didn't have Friday school. And then in high school, I was also on track because my school had to pick a medical field or business field, and I was on track for a medical field, but I was mainly interested in like the intersection of physiology and psychology. So that indirectly factored into it because I've always kept up with it. And then my family is all educators, so every single person besides my brother works in it. And I have nieces and nephews born all in these different ages that are also affected during this time. And then for the process, I discussed with my mentor slash PhD student slash professor at UL Women's University about like digital imaging because I hadn't met like another female digital imager that focused on stuff close to home like this. So it kind of all factored into me wanting to do a project on it.
Okay, thank you, Juliette. I'm going to go on.
Hello, hello. My name is Kneeream-Lapian, and I'm going to be presenting my BFA exhibition called Fabricating Reality. Fabricating Reality centers around 6 main tapestries that were all hand-dyed and hand-screen printed on. Each tapestry is supposed to represent a moku of the island of Oʻahu, which is the island we are on. We primarily reside in the Kona moku, which is the first tapestry out of the series. And this is your areas like Honolulu, Makiki, Mānoa. And in this piece here, I wanted to highlight the development we see a lot in this moku. So on the sides here, we have, apartment buildings, more development in the center. And I made up this pattern using breezeways in architecture buildings. Sorry if I'm a little nervous right now. One thing I really wanted to highlight when dyeing this tapestry was the difference in color, especially in water in this moku. Seeing as it's such a moku that's in development, growing up in this moku, I've noticed just the difference in water in color, especially. We have clean, pristine waters on good days. We have not so, clean waters. Certain areas of the moku, murky, brackish. But as of recently, I wanted to highlight a new kind of color with the Red Hill water crisis, and aerial pictures of that crisis went down. And one color I wasn't familiar with was this really kind of dark brown red color that you normally never see in the waters here. And so I really wanted to highlight that color in this tapestry. Just in terms of going down the line, we have Eva, which is the geographical center of our island. And Eva translates to land reddened by the earth. And so that's why this tapestry itself is primarily red. The checkerboard pattern I came up with because Eva to me is also a moku that's heavily dominant with development, construction, especially with the new rail project. So there's a lot of development in that area, especially in our history there as well. We have a lot of agriculture in that area. And so this checkerboard pattern is meant to reflect not only the repetition of agricultural fields, but also man-made fields or, community areas in that moku. And if you zoom in here, we have an important geographic location there, which is Pearl Harbor, which has always really been an important location on our island, both with history in World War II, but also in Hawaiian history, because it's just a major point of water, which again is very important in Native Hawaiian culture. In the other pattern, we see an abundance of sugarcane with a lot of greenery going inward. That kind of represents the repetition of fields and trees and agriculture that we see in this moku, and along with the production of sugarcane and its past. Going again down the line to the westernmost moku, which is Waianae, which the name translates to freshwater mullet, which was a fish that was heavily cultivated in that area. Water there is very important, as we can see here. The abundance of fresh water and brackish water fish ponds were prevalent in this area for the cultivation of fish, which due to its position on the westernmost side of the island, it's a more barren moku, not in terms of, just in terms of producing sustenance. So they relied heavily on fish and marine life for survival. I also wanted to highlight color with this moku because, again, we see how a more barren kind of area lends itself to more yellow, more brown colors. But I, however, wanted to emulate it and make it more golden. But if we look carefully, you can see that I hand dyed each individual square so that the colors aren't exactly the same, and it lends itself to that variation, which is, of course, a more gold color. Because gold itself isn't really a color, it's more of like a texture where it's like it moves along with the light. So that's what I wanted to show. But also I also wanted to include the importance of red, which in the series here represents more earth color or just earth. And one of the more geographically important sections on this moku is the Ka'ala Mountains, which back Waianae, which are very sacred mountains culturally. It is where Papa and Wakea met to create mankind, basically. So again, the importance of water flowing from mountain to the sea is important in this moku as well. And so that's why I designed the fish ponds to flow that way. And like looking closer, you can see little fishermen that make up the negative space in the pattern. And that's, of course, culturally because Waianae has a very big fishing community. And I think we can start on this side, sorry. I designed it this way so people that come in can walk through it and actually see the back sides of these tapestries. But moving on to the three back here, we have Ko'olau Poko, Ko'olau Loa, and Wailua. And so Ko'olau Poko is the moku that like Waimanalo, Kailua reside in. And to me, it's a really beautiful area. It's been depicted as so in so many kind of social media platforms. And so I really wanted to highlight the beauty of that. So when dyeing the paper here, I did a nice gradient from, a nice clear blue to a nice lush green, which is reminiscent of that area. And in this pattern right here, I've made a pattern that depicts the Ko'olau mountain range in a very stylistic way that kind of fits the tapestry. I didn't want to do too realistic patterns because, again, tapestries, or especially textiles, lend themselves to more abstract forms. And so in the whites here, I also wanted to show more this idea of white picket fence, because this moku in particular has always been one to be beautified to the outside gaze. And so a lot of pictures are taken in this area that show the beautiful white beaches or white sand beaches, beautiful mountains, which is very prominent in this area. Next, we go over to Ko'olauloa, which is the moku that Kahuku resides in. It is the moku with a more land area, comparatively so. And so that's why I put more warm tones and brown colors in this. One thing that I wanted to show in each one of these tapestries is their battle kind of with gentrification, urbanization, systems that are really destructive to these natural environments. And so in this pattern, I highlighted two kind of implications of it. So we have windmills that you can see driving through Kahuku on your way to that side of the island. But also if you closer to the coastline in a lot of residential areas, there's an abundance of mangroves, which are very invasive. And so a lot of the time people that build houses close to the coastline don't understand what coastal erosion is. And so they think planting mangroves in those areas will prevent it. However, it actually further destroys and decays the coastline because it's, again, an invasive species. So it doesn't suit the natural systems here. But yeah, and I just like this pattern because I wanted the windmills and the mangroves to all be backed again by a section of the ko'olaus, which are really important culturally as well. And then going down to the last one, we have Wailua, which to me, I don't have a lot of experience with Wailua, but it was always something that has remained untouched to most of the community here. And that's what I wanted to highlight. So I wanted to depict the constant flow of water from mountain to ocean. So again, we start off at the top with more warm tones, and then we work our way down to, blues, which represent water. And I just flipped it around for design purposes so that it remains interesting to the eye. Looking more in the center, we have the pattern I made up out of the birthing stones that are found there. And these birthing stones are important because they were the birthing stones of former kings, high-ranking individuals in the Hawaiian community. And so I wanted to highlight their importance in that area. However, it is another aspect that is pushed a little bit. It is a little tourist attraction in that area. And, to the tourists, it's something that's really exotic, birthing stones. But I wanted to both highlight and repeat them because that's what a lot of people do when they go to that area. And then I also wanted to highlight, it's a really small pattern here, but at nighttime, you can see the glowing red dots at the top of the windmills you can see in the other moku. And so it's just all these little hints at urbanization that kind of each affect each moku. Another important thing I wanted to highlight was the craft behind it, because as a whole, these are supposed to represent my indigenous community of Indonesia, which they themselves battle with the development of textiles. A lot of Southeast Asian countries have issues with the textile industry plaguing their natural resources, destroying their communities. And Indonesia is, no exception. So when making these pieces, I cut up 432 individual squares of mulberry paper and hand-dyed each one single-handedly and printed on each one single-handedly, and then sewed them all together to make all 6 of these tapestries. And so that's kind of meant to reflect the work that goes into these communities that have to survive against gentrification, urbanization, and just modernization as a whole. Whereas the skill of textile making and sewing, cooking, and all of those things, they are, intrinsically survival skills. Communities use them in the past so that they would be able to survive and sustain themselves. But in today's society, they find themselves using those skills for the kind of middleman that is money, and which equals survival. So they find themselves consistently producing, reproducing for, you know, money that they need to buy food, shelter, and other clothing items. So as a whole, that's what these 6 tapestries represent. But yeah, I open the floor to questions.
Hello, Noah.
Oh my God.
Did you envision all of the designs before you began this, or did you add
More along, the thing I envisioned most was the color schemes beforehand, because that was the first layer. Just having the color schemes figured out, because that's what really would have made these tapestries unique. Was I could have printed these images just on white paper, but the color and the background behind each image is what's really important. So that really lends itself to the repetition of the squares. Because I could dye each one individually. Each one has its own kind of special, you know, touch. Each, you know, if we look on I don't know if I can show it again, but on the back of these is where you can really see the mistakes and the flaws of each tapestry, which is another thing I'm okay with, because along of living in Hawaii so long, it's a lot of things get glorified, whereas the reality of it isn't so pretty. You know, in the front you see this beautiful tapestry with hand-printed designs, but in the back you see, you know, off-sewed stitches, misplaced paper, ripped edges, things like that. Like more grit behind what the beauty of this place is.
Can I ask, does the order in which you displayed them have any significance to the piece, or like significance to the geographics of Oʻahu?
Oh yeah, so if you look at your standard map of Oʻahu, it's Kona, Ewa, Waianae, and then on the back side, or the more northern side, you have Ko'olau, Poko, Ko'olauloa, and Wailua. And so I wish I could have geographically represented them more in the tapestries, because one thing I wanted to do was have a connecting point between Wailua and Waianae, because they make up Ke'ena Point, which is, again, another geographically important point. But yeah, they do play a geographically important role. Any other? Nope. Okay.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
Hello. Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't think they can hear you.
Okay.
Oh, hello.
Hello, Noah.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Navarro. I'm a photographer, and this is my project, Oʻahu Transpired. A little bit about me. I've been living here for the past 7 years, and moved originally from the Bay Area, and moved away when I was 19. So part of this work is about what Hawaii means to me. Kind of want to share a little story with you guys. One of my first experiences in the ocean here, I went out with a friend. He's like, "You know how to swim?" I was like, "Yeah, of course, swim all the time." But it wasn't until went to this spot called Keikis, and I got worked. I was panicking, being tossed, trying to fight my way out of the ocean. And she's like, "Relax, take a deep breath and relax, and then go back down." And after I got out of the ocean, I kind of realized, it made me realize the fact that I really didn't know how to swim relative to the location. And I think when I think about my work is moving here, I really thought I knew a little bit about Hawaii, but I come to find out that I had no idea what this place really is. And it's really given me kind of question my own identity, even as well. Growing up in the Bay Area, I find people that look like me all the time, and it wasn't until here I kind of had this feeling of being an outsider, and I kind of questioned that. But also along my journey here, I've met others with a similar situation, and I kind of found yeah, kind of shared experiences with him. The way I have it displayed is like kind of a collage style, and I chose that to represent. I think of my work kind of democratic, meaning that no one image is more important than the other. They just kind of all help share the story. One of the photos I kind of want to talk about first is this gentleman right here. I met him one time when I was out photographing, and he kind of approached me, and he's selling me domain websites. And I was just like, oh, it's so weird. And then when I started talking more to him, and he's kind of shared with me that he had just gotten out of jail, and he was just trying to find a way to make an honest living, and he's trying to hustle his way. And I really felt a connection to him just because where I grew up in a rough neighborhood as well, actually a murder capital. And I think we had this relationship, the fact that we both, even though we grew up in rougher places, we kind of have this ambition and just trying to hustle our way out. And even more so, like, I think visually he shows that just the way he's dressed. If you take a closer look, you can see him in a snapback with some sneakers and duffel bag, but he still showed he's wearing a suit just to like show his professionalism, which I kind of find it like a little bit interesting, especially in this hot, humid weather. But it's also interesting the fact that the background is just, it really shows the backdrop of this place with the houses and the little mountain in the background. Like, I think what I was so drawn about that too is that it really ties to here. And I try to do that in a lot of my work, to really try to make it so that it feels like it can only be taken here. And the next photo I kind of want to talk about is right up here. It's of this mango tree that I took in Kaimuki. Just from seeing this photo, you kind of get, if you live here, you kind of get an idea of what this kind of means. And more so the time of year, you can just tell it's summer. And what I thought was so interesting about it is it's like a mundane scene, but if you see this, you're like, how has nobody picked all these mangoes? Like, I just find it kind of interesting that there's so many. And it's kind of cool how in most of my work I have this nature and urban landscape kind of working together. So that kind of has that element where you can just tell by the fence that this isn't just some tree out in nature. It's like a neighborhood. And next one I want to talk about is this young lady right here. Good friend of mine, her name is Chloe. What I like about this image, and I think it's strong in this piece for me, is that she kind of shares what youth culture is. And a little bit about Chloe is that she's a local girl from the Big Island. She's a country girl. But just by seeing this image, you don't get that. Don't get that from her. You kind of get her, like, what she's wearing and her necklace and her nose ring. Like, she just looks like a city girl. And I really like that because it questions her identity here in a way. And we kind of have this conversation of, how this place kind of changes you in a way. And next one I want to talk about is this one right over here. This boat. I came across it near a park by school, and it caught my eye. I thought it was really interesting and a little out of place. The fact that it was built or just left there right in front of the grass, and nobody was really paying attention about it. But what I thought was great is that the fact that it was so well crafted. It's hard to tell, but you have to get up close. But it just kind of reminds me of the way my process is in terms of my camera. It's this big, old, clunky thing, but it's well crafted. And if you appreciate things well crafted, it's kind of one of those things. But I kind of took a photo of it the way I composed this image was to kind of emphasize the significance of this, and nobody else around thought it was interesting, but I felt like kind of touch upon some things that I wanted to give the viewer some intentionality. So, and when I think about it, is probably some young student, you know, like they're doing this project and it's this knowledge that's being passed down to them. And I think a lot of what I've learned about this place kind of is through passages as well, through the people living here in this environment. So I think that's how that works for me. And this last one I want to talk about is rock over here. So in this photo, amongst all those other rocks, there's a bunch of other rocks that look exactly like this, same. But this is the only one that was decorated, and I thought it was interesting, the shell rosary. And one, I feel like that's very like here, the fact that it's just shells, but it's also kind of this significance to somebody, and I kind of wanted to show that. So the way I approached this was to kind of approach it the same way I would take a portrait, get up real close to it, shoot it with a lot of shallow depth of field, so it really emphasizes the rock itself and doesn't get distracted, but with everything else going on. And what I thought was interesting too is how all these weeds help also frame the image, and it just kind of mimics the form of the rock. But more than anything, it just, you know, you can just tell that it was of significance to somebody, and I wanted to share that. Especially with the, can't really tell, but there's just an image here and framed that it's probably been there so long that you can't even tell the image anymore. And when I think of this image, is someone paying tribute to someone. And the way I think this relates to me is the fact that I kind of want to pay tribute to all the people that I've met along this journey here on this island and helped me develop my own identity here. With that being said, is there any questions?
I remember you saying that you felt a very close relationship with the man in that photo that you took. Are there other images in here that you like? Do you feel that same relationship with every image, or like other images specifically?
That was kind of a tough one, but I mean, I don't have that same connection because this one, Benjamin, he really shares the same experience that I do. Everybody else is kind of a shared experience, but you know, sometimes I meet people for such a brief moment. I don't know much about them, but I kind of really spent time with him, and I just think the background was really what made this so important for me. Yes.
So I'm super interested in just the overall process of selecting the photos. Like, did you go out and experience things over time and just bring your camera along and decide to photograph them? Or did you go and like seek out people in places to go to and photograph it in that sense?
Yeah, so it goes kind of both ways. But more than anything, I don't just carry, my camera is like this big clunky thing like I mentioned, so I don't just walk around everywhere and just carry with me. It's very much, when I carry it, it's like I have the intention of photographing, but it is kind of spontaneous. I don't always have like an agenda in mind. I have been working on this project for the past few years, so piecing it along together, I kind of considered like, oh, okay, I need more people, or I want more of the location, but there's never really seeking this. I kind of stumble upon these things. Like, I don't think I could imagine this in my head, like making this or some of the other ones, or even meeting Benjamin this way. Like, so yeah, it's kind of stumbled upon, but I think the more I'm out there, the luckier I become with getting these images. All right. Anybody else? All right, thank you.
Okay. Y'all hear me? Aloha. Hey, everybody. My name's Hana. I'm here to talk with you about my artworks today. I first just want to say thank you all for coming. I hope you're really enjoying meeting all of these wonderful artists and their artworks. It's been a pleasure knowing them, growing with them, and just learning who they are my past time here. So without further ado, let's talk about my art. So this artwork is a mix between realism and neopop art. And that idea came to me through the inspiration of a few of my favorite artists, including James Jean, Jenny Saville, and Michael Armitage. So James Jean has these beautiful dream-like works that just like really take you in, and they take you to this imaginary landscape that feels like it could be in true life. And Jenny Saville has this wonderful way of taking realism and mixing it with a distortion of reality and some slight neopop in some of it. And when I saw her work when I went to Italy for a semester abroad, I just looked at it and I felt so connected to it, because my entire artistic career I've gone through this battle of what is my art style. I had nothing to claim as my own. I had been going back and forth between realism and neopop inspired things for as long as I could remember. And when I saw her work, I said, why can't I just do both? As far as Michael Armitage, he is a wonderful artist who goes back and forth between London and Kenya, and he works with natural materials from his own culture, and he makes his own canvases, and he paints these beautiful scenes that are very narrative. He takes stories from life and from, social context of his time, and also going back in time and taking from his history and his culture. And when I saw that, I was like, yes, I have always wanted to do a storytelling piece. That is something so important to me. And then I had to sit there and be like, okay, what story am I going to tell? And I got shot back to when my tutu would tell me bedtime stories. She would tell me mo'olelo, which are basically ancient Hawaiian stories. And they can be seen in many ways. They can be seen as spiritual. They can be seen as more mythological and, made up, just an idea, a metaphor, or they can be seen as religious and true. And I always knew that my tutu saw them as true life. They were factual. They were things that were happening. And she's been a huge inspiration for me in my journey of exploring my own culture. She's introduced me to all of the traditional cultural practices and traditions, including kapa making, which is the material that is featured just behind the plexiglass. So she introduced me to a wonderful kumu named Kumu Delani Tanahi, and me and her worked on the west side for 6 months. She taught me everything. She taught me how to plant, how to cultivate, and the vauke trees, which it's made out of, how to make all of my own tools out of natural resources, just like they would in the olden times, and how to pound out the kapa. So it's a very meticulous process. I give big praise to her. She is a wonderful kumu, and I just learned so much from her on especially bringing cultural practice into my own art. And that's when I really just realized I really wanted to connect to my roots within my art. And that's kind of how it came to be that I created these pieces. So a little bit about how I work. I'm very meticulous, especially when I'm doing realism. I'm very up close with the painting. We're like this close. And I'm spending hours, sometimes 16 hours straight, just in this meditational trance-like state with it. And it makes it kind of hard to gain perspective. When I switched over or started experimenting with neo-pop, I was able to get a bit more of a new perspective. I was able to stand back because there wasn't so many tiny little strokes going in all the time. It was kind of one big gesture, and then you take a step back and you gain a new perspective. Going back to my time studying abroad in Italy, I was experimenting with, going back and forth between this realism and neo-pop, combining the two, and then just to make it more difficult on myself, I explored multimedia. So I was playing with what acrylic can do that oil cannot, vice versa, what pastels can do to a canvas, how adding alcohol, how adding watering down the pigments, how all that can change how it looks, and even scratching the surface itself, which you can see here, I was playing around with. And I just love it because it's this little tiny figure that no one notices, but when it's hung up, you can really see it. And it just gave me this whole new perspective on how you can interact with the canvas itself. And another big impactful moment for me when I was learning in Italy was that I can use plexiglass itself as my canvas. And I loved this so much because I had this entirely different vision of, if you want to come with me, the back side. So the back side of the canvas is something on a traditional canvas that you never get to see. It's completely hidden, and with plexiglass, it opened up this entirely new universe for me. Beyond that, the plexiglass introduced these really cool shadows, which, if you want to come back around, you can see them on the floor, on the wall, casting a shadow on the kappa. And I loved this so much because it was just an entirely new place for the artwork to exist and an entirely new way to see it. So I was totally in love with this industrial material, and I was thinking to myself, how can I work this into a piece? How can I tell a story? How can I do all of these factors that I've been talking about? And I thought that's kind of how my mind is. I'm really scattered. I want to include everything. And at the same time, I want it to all come together and make something that is beautiful, makes sense, da-da-da. So I've created these works, which are kind of a physical representation of my mind, everything all together all at once, like that new movie that just came out. So next slide. Let's talk about the colors. So with these, you'll see a lot of neon, bright colors. And I think this really translates to me growing up in the social context that I did. I was surrounded by Instagram. I was surrounded by Disney movies coming out all the time. I was surrounded by new toys, new this, da-da-da, all using these very bright colors. And it gave me such a nostalgic feeling when I looked at them. So I wanted to include that when I'm talking about our new social context on this industrial material. But at the same time, I wanted to fit in some earthy tones that could connect my connection to the earth and also Hawaiian culture's connection to the Aina into my paintings. So these paintings and the kapa work behind it, it describes a relationship between past and present cultures, the shift between them, as well as the similarities that they hold. So the conversation happening between them, that's why I placed them like this. I wanted them to have enough room to talk and be comfortable, and for the viewer to be able to go in between, look back and forth at them, and kind of see how they're relating. So I wanted to use the medium of my ancestors, how they told their stories, how they passed on their knowledge, and then show it in a relevant, more today context and like style, to see just how relevant it can be to us. So pre-colonization, there was no written literature, right, for Hawaiians. So word of mouth and kapa designs were how they conveyed their storytelling and how they passed on information. I've chosen the story Kihawahine. On the QR code, you can scan it later. There's a full summary description. It's a very long story, but I'll give you a short one. It's essentially about the dragon lady, which is here, or the mo'o woman, how she steals the goddess Haumea's husband, Puna. And it's an epic tragedy on Puna's journey to escape Kihawahine and get back to his wife, Haumea, on the island of Oʻahu. In the end, Puna is killed. He's killed by the new chief of Oʻahu, and Haumea, his wife, enchants one of the new chief's dogs to kill the chief. Very dark, as most Hawaiian mo'olelo tends to be. And I think that's a reflection on the way of life that, it used to be back then. It was a direct translation to the harsh reality and the harsh world that they face. It's not all coconuts and rainbows like a lot of outsiders view Hawaii to be. Life was difficult back then, and it was brutal. So a lot of those stories are pretty direct about that. I think these stories can all be translated in many ways. Personally, to me, I take it as a precautionary tale to beware of kolohe people or tricksters. It can also be seen as you need to be wise in order to survive. And ultimately, the power of the gods, the will of the gods, is what will prevail. So mo'olelo is so important because it's a part of Hawaiian history. These little meanings behind the story, the olelo no'iau, is what they would use to translate their important cultural values. So they hold spiritual and cultural lessons that need to be passed down because they hold the key values of the Hawaiian culture. Within this art, I emphasize how vital it is that the Hawaiian culture remains intact in the present. We don't want to lose those valuable practices and traditions that have been cultivated for years. Lastly, I just want to throw out another thank you to my parents, my grandparents, Kumu Filani Tanahi, because they're all the people who made this possible for me. They're all the people who introduced me to the Hawaiian cultural renaissance, essentially. And yeah, I want to open the floor to any comments or questions, if anyone has any.
There's a couple texts that came in. So Kirsten has asked, these are beautiful, Hana. Were Indonesian shadow puppets an influence?
Were what shadow puppets?
Indonesian shadow puppets. And I think she's thinking about the shapes that are made on the wall with the shadows.
No, they actually weren't an influence in mine, but Noah is very inspired by the Indonesian culture. Mine was entirely Hawaiian. And what's funny about those shadows is at first I was planning on having the pieces be very close to the wall and casting the shadow directly behind them. But then I didn't get the experience of walking behind them. And this light that's placed right here was something I had no idea about. And I think the placement is wonderful because it makes these shadows cascade down, but it's not obstructing the view of the kapa itself. It's casting down just below it so that we can hold up the value of the kapa itself and keep it in the light. I thought that was a great metaphor.
And there's a related question. There's a few questions. Wendy asked, can you talk about why you chose to have the cast shadows of the two outside paintings connect with the ground? Johnny Mack said, can you talk about the purpose or concept behind the shadows cast on the kapa cloth?
Everyone loves the shadows. I think, yeah, Deborah told me, like I said, it was kind of a happy accident. But she told me, Hana, people are going to love the shadows. It's really making the whole piece. And I had to sit there and think about it because, like I said, that wasn't my intention in the beginning. It's something that happened with this beautiful light that was put right there is like divine intervention a little bit. And like I said, just casting the shadows back on this kind of gives us a bit of a timeline and shows, us here in the present, and then that shadow that we cast back on our ancestors. It kind of gives us a bit of space between the past and the present and shows our impact on that as well as its impact on ourselves.
And I think a couple of people's questions, wait, let me unmute.
A couple of people's questions were specifically about relationships to the shadows and placements. Like Wendy was asking about the height, why a couple of them touched the ground. And a couple of people were asking specifically about the kappa cloth and the meaning of the kappa cloth and the meaning of having shadows cast on the kappa cloth. Okay.
Yeah, so the kappa itself is a very meticulous process, just like how I like to paint the realism. I really enjoyed how many steps to the process there were. You know, first you gotta take off the branch, then you gotta slice it open with a sharp tooth, peel off the outer layer, you mash it, you ferment it, mash it again, mash them together, ferment again. It's this entire process that takes hours and hours and hours, and it's been passed down for generations. It's something that was used not only for art and storytelling, but it was also used for weddings. They would wrap it around the two to, symbolize their reunion. And I think there's just so much value in this particular medium, and that's why I decided to use it. Yeah. Oh, one more thing. I meant to state that the order of these, I wanted it to be like an overarching story. Like, you know, when you're in class and you're like, okay, your teacher shows you kind of a hill, and it's like at the beginning of the hill is the beginning of the story. Then we're working up. Then we got the climax. Then we got the downfall. So that's kind of how I was imagining the overarch of this. So we have the beginning of the story here, and this is showing when Kihawahine took Puna and kept him in her cave. And then over here is the battle between Pele and Kihawahine, and how she fell down into the ocean and she stayed there dormant until she went back. And then over here is the story of when Haumea wrapped herself in the ulu fruit, and the dog ate her, the chief's dog ate her, became possessed, and attacked and killed the chief. So we see that translation of the story come in directly, and I think it's good that someone pointed that out, and I could tell you about it a bit more.
And one last question online. What about your life? Why this story? Is there something about your life that this story resonates with specifically?
So it was interesting for me that I always knew about Mo'o women, but I didn't know they were seen as such dragons, because it was literally the dragon woman when I looked up the story. And dragon is very special to me. It's a very special spirit animal to me, because born in the year 2000, my Chinese animal is the golden dragon. So I've always felt very connected to it that way. It also stood for femininity in the Hawaiian culture, and a little bit of being kolohe. A little bit of being, and also intense power. So all of those things, I felt like I was seeing myself reflected in this animal, and that's why I was really drawn to this particular story. All right, well, thank you guys so much. Next, we're gonna go to Susanne.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Susanne Barnes. I'm in the BFA program in painting. And this project began during, well, in my mind, it began during COVID, because with the isolation we all had from people we knew, I started to wonder about my family, as well as people who were still living and those who had passed away. It provided me with time, COVID provided me with time and curiosity to search for people that I hadn't really known before. Long unanswered questions about my family led me to search and discover them. So over a century ago, actually more like over 150 years ago, their desperation led them to leave parts of Europe, Romania, Russia, Moldova, and to escape, to avoid being killed. The Holocaust was part of it, but I think it actually began before World War I. And I didn't know my father, but eventually I came upon a book that was written by this young woman when she was in her 90s. And in it, there's a very long history of who started where, who married who, where they ended up. And it led them to cross country borders, to cross continents, and to cross oceans. All of this was new to me until I was in my 40s. And this little boy is my father, or was my father. And my brother and I were in this painting, but didn't know that we had another family who had started in Europe. And the book was written in French by this woman. And then when I discovered it, I really didn't know French. It turned out I had a cousin who translated it into English, and I've gotten pretty close to her, and she keeps this wild Facebook page. There's like 30 members in one family group, and there's 30 in another, and there's a lot of people that I probably will meet, I hope. But I was just I felt gratitude that they made it, that they managed to survive, and that they were strong enough and crafty enough and whatever they had to do to get out. So that's where the title comes from, is gratitude and survival. When I realized how many relatives I had that were still around, Olivia, the translator of this book, got me in touch with Marcel, she's a sculptor, maybe we don't say sculptress, but that elephant is it's pretty large. I saw a model of it, and the big one is larger than, it's larger than the bathtub here. So I'm very proud of her. And I felt connected, like, oh, there's an artist in the family, or more than one artist in the family. And anyway, I probably, if I had spent an extra year on this, I would put more people in, but I think I've been told not to put too much into it. So that's where it ended up. Are there any questions?
So Suzanne, I love your work, obviously, and I just wanted to know what made you choose the type of colors that you put into each of your cats.
The bright colors. Yes, people asked me that. I think I liked them because I felt happy about the project. And the first map, when I started this one, I did a map, and I liked the yellow, and it kind of kept going. It could have been darker, I suppose. I like bright colors. It's not a very, I don't think it's a very deep answer. Any other? Go.
I also wanted to know who are your influences for, like, you know, just the type of painting and techniques that you use, like for the figures and whatnot. So
well, I discovered that Larry Rivers was somebody whose style I admired, And then I discovered that Larry Rivers is from the Bronx, where I grew up. But I didn't know about him until much further in the process of painting it. And Chagall is another artist that I enjoy very much. It was more like an intellectual inspiration than it was a painting style. I think I paint the way I paint. And it's a little new for me to paint from photographs, which is mostly what we have here. So I don't know, does that answer the question for you?
And you have a question from the audience on Zoom.
Oh.
Ellen Dieter says, I love the pink in the painting on the right. It is unexpected. How did you get to Hawaii? And these are very different from your plein air work. How does that feel? So a couple questions. You must know your work through some other. So first, how did you get to Hawaii? With this journey, there's no landing in Hawaii, right?
Oh.
And then how is this different than your plein air painting?
Thanks for the question. Well, I grew up in the Bronx, but then eventually ended up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of the Packers. And my husband and I were kind of, we were kind of looking for a change. Our kids had all gone off to college, and he took a job here. So I came along with him. And I had really liked I liked painting for years and years and years, even before I retired. And that's how I got here. And my first friends were through outdoor painting groups, or at the Museum of Art. They had live models to paint from. I don't think I made it here for that, but it just kept going. That's like what I did. So compared to plein air, well, it's a lot easier when you have a photo because it doesn't move. When you're painting outdoors, oh my God, you have to, you have the clouds move, and then the shadows move, and then it's light and it's dark, and you have to be quick. So this, and the size, of course, is different.
Ellen Dieter said, sounds like you carried on the tradition of migration too.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
I noticed that you go from a strong sense of perspective into more flat areas into full-on abstraction. Is there a relation between all of those, or what's the difference of having some features flat and some extremely realistic?
The honest answer is time. I think I would have liked to have resolved some of them better, but it's interesting to kind of plop one thing onto the other. My first year painting in Deborah Drexler's classes, we tried many different techniques, and I found it was kind of freeing that one didn't have to include everything, and it didn't have to be in perfect perspective. So it kind of went on from there. Yes, yeah.
What's the large scale really necessary for you this story is so remarkable? You could get off the same feeling if you tried this smaller.
I think it would have been easier if I didn't use such a large canvas. but now, having done it, that was my first one. Maybe I'll do more. We'll see. That's good. That's a good, I should have answered it the way you asked it.
Is the Kihawahine that you're doing also something that you tried before, or is this something that you do?
No, that's definitely new. I was, previous to moving to Hawaii, I was like, you paint what's in front of you. Where's the shadow under this? Where's the the light coming from, etc. And in some senses that, it's kind of easier in a way, but it's not necessarily the best layout. Well, anyway, so this is kind of something new I've learned at Mānoa in the art department.
I know editing has been an issue, and how did you choose, like in the long term, like what to leave in, what to take out? So we've been through processes of editing to figure out how to most succinctly tell your story of migration and survival for your family. So when it came down to it, there's some editing of images you chose not to put in at the end, and how did you make those decisions?
It was somewhat arbitrary in a sense. Last year I concentrated on one part of my family and my husband's family, and this was the big mystery. Where did Dad go? Where did Dad come from? And in the end, I put him in as a child, but I didn't put him in as an adult. It'll sound horrible, but he wasn't there for me when I was a child, and I didn't see that. I wanted to put him in the painting and give the honor, like I did for her and my half-brother Charlie. Oh, by the way, little Charlie was about 4 or 5 when he crossed the Atlantic and ended up in South America, not knowing where his parents were. Eventually he got found and grew up and had a family, and I'm in contact with his children, but that might be more than you were asking, but that's how I chose.
With the situation happening now in Ukraine, do you think about that at all in terms of what your own family went through,
Totally.
escape and genocide?
Yes, of course. I mean, it not only there, yes, this is like right in our face, but it seems like there's one conflict after another, huge genocides. And I didn't put the dots in where they came from specifically on that map, but it wasn't far from the Ukraine. And my heart goes out to the people that are going through this. I guess it won't, we were talking about it in art history today about war. Why is there always war? And it seems like it just continues. They were escaping the Nazis during the Holocaust. I'm sure all of you can think of many other large tragedies and why people emigrate. Maybe some of you have similar histories as well.
One other question, like what do you think you could share about survival and hope in situations like that? Because obviously your family went through survival and thriving post this situation.
Well, of course, I wasn't there when they decided to leave, but they didn't wait until they were caught. They kept, sometimes it's just dumb luck in a way, but I think there were a lot of family members who looked ahead and took whatever they had and sold it to get on boats. Oh, actually, there's an interesting movie. My cousin Olivia, the one who translated it, Sousa Mendez was an Argentinian diplomat. I think I've got this right, who signed papers during World War II letting Jews leave Europe. He was basically breaking the Portuguese law, but he got about 30,000 people out of the country. And if you care to look for it. It's been shown many different places in the world. It's the Sousa Mendez story. And sometimes you encounter good people that are in power and allow escape. So
we can probably take, I think we missed a question for Noah earlier, if that person's still on and wants to ask the question. And if there are questions for any of the other students here, is the person who had the question for Noah still have a question?
I'll answer Noah's question.
I guess the time has passed, but I just want to say, maybe you can get a view of all the students, like you all want to stand together for a second. In the gallery. So, congratulations to the BFA class of 2022. Great work, everybody. Yay. And Juliette's standing virtually with them. She just turned her screen on. So congratulations, you all did a great job today. And yes, there is more of this on Thursday, so you can come back and hear the 3D people talk about their work. So 2D people today did a great job. Congratulations all. See you all on Thursday. Have a nice evening, everybody, and come see the show in person. So it's really, if you haven't been in the gallery yet, walk in, see it, spend some time with the work. So see you Thursday. Bye.